Donald Trump and prominent MAGA Republicans are publicly freaking out about President Biden's decision not to seek re-election and to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris instead, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as you know, yesterday, President Biden made an historic decision. Even though he's eligible to run for a second term, he decided that he's not going to run for re-election, even though he said he still is confident he could beat Donald Trump. And then he endorsed Vice President Harris to be the presumptive Democratic nominee. Now, that took the entire political world by storm. A lot of people were predicting that this would happen. Others say that, Biden's stubbornness was going to keep him in the race no matter what. But no matter what you think, it was earth-shattering news. It was huge, even if you expected it to occur. What's interesting to me, or perhaps most interesting to me, is how MAGA Republicans, including Donald Trump, have reacted to the news. So Donald Trump himself has been in the midst of a meltdown. He's not handling it very well. One of his many posts on the subject is this.
So we're forced to spend time and money on fighting crooked Joe Biden. He polls badly after a terrible debate and quits the race.
Now we have to start all over again. Shouldn't the Republican Party be reimbursed for fraud in that everybody around Joe, including his doctors and the fake news media, knew he was not capable of running for or being president? Just asking. So Donald Trump right now is complaining. He's demanding that the Republican Party be reimbursed because President Biden made a decision, a personal decision that he was perfectly at liberty to make, to not seek re-election. Now, again, it's the Biden-Harris administration. It was the Biden-Harris campaign, the fundraising that went out for President Biden. Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is part of that ticket. She gets the $96 million as part of the Biden war chest. She actually raised nearly $90 million, perhaps even more. We haven't gotten the final tally yet from Act Blue, but she's effectively doubled that war chest in just 24 hours. And Trump is complaining. Trump is whining because, of course, he is, because he's a snowflake, as MAGA Republicans are. Now, he wasn't interviewed publicly on this subject, so we didn't get to see his frustration and rage and fear in real time. But we got something else which was pretty good, which was Stephen Miller, Donald Trump's one of his top advisors and somebody who is very likely to play a very prominent role in a second hypothetical Trump administration. He had a meltdown on the Fox Propaganda Network on Laura Ingraham's show.
They held a primary. People, they had ballots. They filled out circles. They went to the voting booths. They spent money on advertisements. And as President Trump said, the Republican Party spent tens of millions of dollars running against Joe Biden. Now they just woke up one morning and said, never mind, we're canceling the entire primary. We're getting rid of our candidate, and we're pretending the election has never even happened, and we're going to let donors handpick a new nominee. They held a primary.
Again, such hysterics, such histrionics. He needs to calm down. He's way too emotional. Stephen Miller and Donald Trump, quite frankly, among many other things, are just much too emotional to run a country. They need to have some poise and grace and some stone cold alpha energy, like President Biden and Vice President Harris, for that matter. Of course, everything Stephen Miller said was absolutely ridiculous. Nobody just woke up one morning and decided, to basically change the entire course of the campaign at the drop of a hat. This had been in deliberation, consideration for weeks, okay, particularly after the president's debate against convicted felon Donald Trump. And there was a lot of pressure internally and externally on President Biden to make a different decision. And the data was clear. And they didn't cancel the primary. The Democratic National Convention is in a couple of weeks. Delegates, President Biden's delegates, he said so during, I think it was his interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC. He said that they're at liberty to vote for whomever they want. He personally has endorsed Vice President Harris, but his delegates may choose to not vote for the vice president at the Democratic National Convention. I imagine she will do a clean sweep, but it's technically open. It's as open now as it was before. So Miller, of course, is lying about all of this. But you know who else is lying and acting super shady? I know this is going to stun you. Is MAGA Mike Johnson, Republican Speaker of the House. This is what he said on Twitter. He said, "At this unprecedented juncture in American history, we must be clear about what just happened. The Democrat Party forced the Democrat nominee off the ballot just over 100 days before the election. That's not true. Now, again, there was internal and external pressure on President Biden to make a different decision, but that's perfectly legal. There's nothing unethical and certainly nothing illegal about that. People are entitled to change their minds. People are entitled to say, Mr. President, the polls show that you can't beat Trump, or that you're less likely to beat Trump. And there are prominent Democratic donors, yes, key Democratic supporters, sitting politicians, and yes, many Americans who previously supported you who say that, you should step aside. There was data on either side of this. There were prominent people on either side of this debate, but nothing that went into President Biden's decision was illegal or unethical. So that's just nonsense, what he's suggesting here. Having invalidated the votes of more than 14 million Americans who selected Joe Biden to be the Democrat nominee for president, the self-proclaimed party of democracy has proven exactly the opposite. Now, I'll remind you, listening to Mike Johnson talk about this, and we'll get into his hypocrisy in a moment, but another element of his hypocrisy is that Mike Johnson basically co-signed, co-sponsored, helped lead the legislative efforts by convicted felon Donald Trump to overthrow the free and fair election of 2020, when Donald Trump, was soundly defeated by President Biden. Mike Johnson co-sponsored attempts to disenfranchise 80 million Americans by somehow paving the way for Donald Trump to litigate his way into a second unelected term. So even if everything Mike Johnson is saying here is true, which it's not because he's a liar, but he would have no credibility on this issue anyway. The party's prospects are no better now with Vice President Kamala Harris, who co-owns the disastrous policy failures of the Biden administration. He goes on to complain about her. Obviously, we know that the Biden administration's record is just vastly objectively superior to Donald Trump's, and Mike Johnson could never credibly claim otherwise. And then he ends by saying, if Joe Biden is not fit to run for president, he's not fit to serve as president. He must resign the office immediately. November 5th cannot arrive soon enough. So a couple of things. Number one, President Biden didn't say he's not fit to run for president. He just said he's not going to run for president because presumably, as he'll explain later on in the week, people have lost confidence in his ability to win. That's not him saying, hey, I'm not physically capable or mentally capable to run for president or be president. He even said in his letter, I still think I can win. It was my intention to defeat Trump and serve a second term. But it's the people's confidence which matters most. So again, Mike Johnson's lying. Joe Biden is not, has not, and I can't imagine will say, hey, I'm physically or mentally infirm to be president or run for president, ergo I'm dropping out of the race. So again, the whole thing is predicated on a lie. And by the way, it's two roles. President Biden can say, listen, again, even though I think I can win, people don't think I can win. And so rather than increase the likelihood that Donald Trump becomes president, I'm just going to bow out now and serve the remainder of my term. There's nothing contradictory or mutually exclusive about any of these propositions. I'll also point out that Mike Johnson has said that he will back efforts by the Republican Party, by Republican allies, including the Heritage Foundation, to try to keep a replacement for President Biden as the Democratic nominee off the ticket, off the ballot. Republicans have publicly said that they are going to try to present legal challenges to prevent the Democratic Party from selecting anybody other than Joe Biden as the nominee, including Vice President Harris. And during an interview with Jake Tapper called Mike Johnson out for the bad faith and hypocrisy on supporting that idea.
For it. When some states, Colorado, Maine, tried to disqualify Trump from the ballot last year, you said that every American citizen registered to vote should not be denied the right to support our former president. Could it not be argued that every American voter also has a right to vote for whomever the Democrats nominate?
Well, yes. I mean, the comparison between the two last cycle and this one is apples to oranges. What they're trying to do, a handful of people in the party, including some of the top elected Democrats in the country, are trying to push Joe Biden out. It's an interesting question, Jake. If he's incapable of running for president, how is he capable of governing right now? I mean, there is 5 months left in this administration. It's a real concern, and it's a danger to the country.
So again, he pivots. He goes back to saying things that Joe Biden didn't say. Joe Biden didn't say, I'm not fit to run for president. He just said, it was my intention to run. I still think I can win, but I'm choosing not to. And again, he'll expound why, presumably because he has lost the confidence of millions of Democratic voters. Again, whether you like that or not. But Tapper's point is like, well, listen, when anti-Trump Republicans, and that's what it was, anti-Trump Republicans filed lawsuits across the country, including Colorado, to prevent Donald Trump from being on the ballot because he violated the 14th Amendment's prohibition against insurrectionists running for office. You and other pro-Trump cultists clutched your pearls, whined and cried and, excreted all forms of fluid in your distress because you thought it was anti-democratic, even though it was perfectly democratic. It's just a democratic prohibition against being an insurrectionist. I digress. Now, Mike Johnson wants to back legal efforts and legal shenanigans to try to prevent the Democratic Party from exercising its prerogative to select somebody other than Joe Biden to run for president if Joe Biden drops out of the race, which of course he's done. The bad faith and hypocrisy of the MAGA Republican Party knows no bounds. It is truly limitless. The upshot is that one of the top election lawyers in the country, Mark Elias, has weighed in on this. He responds to Mike Johnson. First, you're an insurrectionist. Second, if your lawyers are telling you that you can prevent the DNC from nominating its candidate of choice, they're idiots. I know a lot about that since I beat them more than 60 times in court after the 2020 election. And again, this is in response to Johnson saying every state has their own election system and the Democrat Party will face legal challenges in trying to remove Biden from the top of the ticket. And again, Mike Johnson has signaled that he will support that. Mark Elias is saying it's not going to work. Quote, Democratic election lawyer Mark Elias has beaten Republicans' brains in during past court battles over certifying the 2020 presidential election, overturning gerrymandered districts, and maintaining and restoring voting rights. I do want to look at this real quick. It's from NewJersey.com. Let's see here. Will Trump GOP fight revised Democratic ticket in court? Top election lawyer has stern warning and prediction. He says, before the media gets the ball rolling, let me be clear. The Democratic nominee for president will be on all 50 states. There is no legal basis for any legal challenge, period. Already, there have been rumblings from Republicans like Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who said his party will examine and possibly bring legal action to thwart the revised Democratic tickets. Fact, there have been 211 court decisions this election cycle that have yielded a clear win or loss for voting rights. In those, pro-voting forces have won 151 victories and suffered 60 losses. While not a perfect record, I think even Coach Parcells would be impressed. Elias said that though there is litigation throughout the country, 4 states' caseloads are in double digits. And so he goes on like this. He's making the case, listen, if Republicans try to engage in this shenaniganry, they will fail. Now, I'm a cynic by nature. Right? I wouldn't put anything past a MAGA judge, a MAGA justice, certainly not the Supreme Court of the United States. But Mark Elias is aware of all these things, and he's expressing confidence that any attempt by Republicans to try to thwart the Democratic Party's moving forward without President Biden on the ticket will be defeated. So that fills me with more hope than it might otherwise. But there you go, folks. MAGA is freaking out about this decision because it changes the dynamics. And listen, I want to be clear. We can still lose this election. Right now, we have no evidence to believe that Vice President Harris is just a decisive and overwhelming defeat for Trump. She's polling. Some polls have her better than President Biden. Some have her, a little bit less than Biden compared to Trump. But she's a new face. She is a new spin. She also has not maxed out her potential advantages in the way that many people would argue President Biden has. He has reached maximum name recognition. The race has been stable between him and Trump. They've been within the margin of error, but Biden has not generally been ahead. Basically, Biden is tapped out of his electoral advantages. He's maxed out. He's done everything he can. Whereas with the vice president, there is still room for her to gain advantage. Okay, so a lot of people are feeling optimistic about it. She's raked in, again, nearly double her current war chest to wield against Trump. And that explains why Trump is so terrified about the prospect of the ticket changing as it has. So delight in their despair and let me know what you think in the comments.